Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and once again, welcome to the Funk Chronicles. I'm your host, Dr. Turk Logan from Logan Communications and the Funk Music Hall of Fame and Exhibition Center. With me today, I have a dear friend and a very, very special guest, Mr. Jim Vangrove. Jim, how you doing?
I am fine, Turk. It is so good to see you again
After
and be
so
back
many
with
years,
you.
boy,
Yep.
I tell you, if people could have heard the conversation we had off the air, we would just sit here all day talking about it because you and I worked together at WDAO.
38 years ago.
38 years ago, and I tell you, and it's always fun to talk to you because you always got a smile. We always got stories. We can sit and tell stories all day.
I loved it. And just to tell the viewers what we were saying a minute ago, when Turk and I began working together, I had bangs. And Turk had a Billy Preston hairdo. No,
Right.
not quite Billy Preston,
Not
but
quite
he
Billy
had a
Preston.
fro that was up there, man.
Yeah, I did have a nice fro. You know, I was indicating that, you know, I took my daughter to WDAO thinking that through osmosis or something, it would rub off on her. And the first thing she was interested in was my hair. And that's been 38 years ago, and she's a successful beautician, making more money than I've ever made in a lifetime, doing quite well. And that was her coming. She was going to be a beautician, and that's what she wanted to do.
She hasn't had the experiences that you've had
No,
during your
she hasn't.
career, that's for sure.
She did one thing that I teased her about because I was a state representative candidate in 1984.
I remember.
And Ronald Reagan started his Whistle Stop tour in Dayton, Ohio. And Ronald Reagan and I had communicated in 1980 when he was challenging Jimmy Carter on Backpage, my talk show. So he remembered. So he wanted the candidates on stage with him and their families. So I called my daughter, I think she was about 9 years old. I said, Tina, the president would like to meet you, would like to shake your hand. She said, Ronald Reagan, Dad? I said, yeah. She said, I'm not interested. My head dropped. And I still,
I remember you on the stage that day.
Yeah, oh, freak Bud Crow out. I'll tell you, because a lot of people don't know that John Charles Logan Jr. and Turk Logan
We're
are
the
same
same man,
people.
exactly. I didn't know your name until you ran for office.
That's right. Bud didn't either, and he sat on the executive committee. He gave me my only donation of $100. That's all I had for the whole daggone campaign. But it was a good lesson, good political lesson. Jim, what are you doing now?
I work for the Montgomery County Commission at the moment. I've been there 6 years, which I love.
Okay.
I was Congressman Tony Hall's deputy chief for a number of years, and was fortunate enough to work quite a few other places. I've been, of course, Channel 22, Channel 2, Channel 7, working in their news departments. I was a news person most of my life, and as we were talking before the air, when the funk boom happened, when it came on the United States, really, it was 1971 or so, I was an 18-year-old kid, just started college in Washington, D.C., and then the Ohio Players hit.
That's right.
And I had heard of the Ohio Untouchables
Right.
as a young kid in Dayton, Ohio. I'd never seen them. I was too young to see them, but I saw ads in the paper, and I knew older people that would say something about them. I didn't know they were the same as the Ohio Players.
Right.
Then they had that first radio hit, and I'm in Washington hearing it, and then Love Roller Coaster comes around, and it just blows up the place. And I think I was telling you the pride that I felt as the players got bigger, and then you had, I don't know the sequence if I can remember right, but I really think at that point it may have been Lakeside or Slave.
Zap.
Zap. I was so proud to be from Dayton. Here I am in Washington, D.C. in the early 70s.
Right.
And the entire world was dancing to the music that was being created on the streets where I drove up and down and lived all my life.
Let me digress a quick second, because the congressman has always been special to me. And when he was put in as the ambassador to Italy, he gave me an interview. And I still have that interview.
I remember you contacted me to get that arranged. That's right.
That's right. And he's always been very, very receptive to communications, and I want to and I still thank him today for that. But what people don't know, Jim, and you know yourself because you were there, and at a lot of the management meetings, we discussed playing funk music, and it just kind of you could see Bud's eyes drop, and Joe Whalen, who's the general manager, and John Jay, who was the station manager, and Ted Leakes, they were like, "You gonna play? What did you just say?" I said, "Funk, F-U-N-K." Okay, and when we started talking about the Dayton groups, you know, the first thing that came up was the groups weren't on Billboard's Top 100. They didn't have record deals.
Right.
Okay, and why do you want to play them if they're not if they're nobodies? And because we grew up together, and because I was there, and a lot of times when the music was being produced and in the studio, I already knew what the potential was. I didn't know how big it was going to be, but it was just second nature for me to do this. It wasn't anything that I was looking for. It was just second nature to play this.
Well, you had a role, and as I said, I didn't come in, and we didn't meet till '77.
Right.
But what I saw, well, the years I was in that station with you, was that you served especially the middle group. The initial pioneers sort of made it. You were the mentor that I saw that was connecting the talent that was local here,
Right.
with the merchandising or the selling of the product. They
Right.
didn't know how to do that or to have the connections. You had that, but what I'm curious about a little bit, Turk, would be which of the groups that came after the Ohio Players did you feel, I guess, most connected to or most responsible for making the connection that allowed their talent to prevail?
One of the things that happened because of the Ohio Players and ZAP, I had the luxury of being able to call a Bruce Lundvall at CBS Records, who was the president. He would take my calls.
Okay.
I had the luxury of talking to Dick Griffey, who was the president of Solar, who signed Lakeside. I had the luxury of calling Henry Allen, who was the president of Cotillion, who signed Slave. Okay. And so they knew if I called, I wasn't going to waste their time, and they knew if I called, I would probably send them some new product that they should put in their ear. And I didn't want anything from them. What I would say was, if it goes gold, give me a gold record. And it got so bad, which was good for me. So many gold records started coming in. I was going to say
the gold records were all over that radio studio.
All over the radio station, but they had my name on them. And so my jocks were starting to feel a little uncomfortable about it. So I had to recall the record labels and said, you know, just put W2 WDAO, take my name off. I asked the record labels to do that. But from the Ohio Players, Junie Morrison and we talked about Junie in Parliament Funkadelic. Junie and I went to high school together. Okay. I realized his talent in high school. The Ohio Players realized his talent, you know, when he did Pain and Fire and Funky Worm and all those tunes. I was there with him, okay? Roger, I watched Roger grow up from about 6 years old when he used to stand in front of a nightclub and couldn't go in it, and the guy that was playing outside of the nightclub in Cincinnati and Hamilton was Jimi Hendrix, and he and Sugar would emulate this great musician. I was there and I watched that unfold. Slave was a little younger than us, but we helped them get their deal as well.
So many of us in this community have forgotten about Zapp and the Troutmans.
Yeah.
You know what a power they were nationally, globally.
Yeah, and still
sitting
today.
there at Salem and Catalpa at those recording studios where, I was a patrol boy near that corner as a grade
And I could
school
go
kid.
in the studio, they would call me in the studio and say, Turk, what do you think?
Yeah.
And it was not music that you would say, I don't know. I mean, I'm talking about More Bounce to the Ounce, I'm talking about Computer Love, Do It Roger. It was the funk. And it was great music, and it was easy to sign off. But you said something earlier when we were talking back in the lunchroom about how the funk evolved in America, not just at WDAO. And you were right. The funk actually evolved from James Brown.
And that's what I remember. We were talking at 1967. I was a 14-year-old kid,
Right.
Northwest Dayton. I got my parents to agree to drop me off at Hare Arena so I could see James Brown.
Right.
And I had seats way in the back, probably the last row in that whole thing. I never saw a show that was like that in my life. And at that time, Maceo was in the band, Bootsy was in the band.
Fred Wesley.
It blew my mind. I'd never seen anything like that. I think I told you the only concert I'd ever been to before James Brown was Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Well,
So talk about your
well, that's a
opposite ends of the universe.
That's a transition. You know, and I had the pleasure of spending quality time with Mr. James. A funny story, because when he came into the area, he recorded at King Recording
Exactly,
Studio
in Cincinnati, drive by it all my life.
Yeah, and I would go down to the studio, and then 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, we go out and open up the clubs that were just closing, the restaurants, and have breakfast at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. But he had a musician with him by the name of Lynn Collins, and Lynn Collins was very well endowed. And I was sitting on the far left, and Mr. Brown was sitting on the right, and he was a tiny guy, he was a short guy. And for me to speak to him, I had to lean really forward to look around to even see him, because Lynn Collins was very well endowed. And and he laughed at me. He said, Logan, you like to have this woman with you? I said, no, sir, Mr. Brown, because we were at the Rotunda in Cincinnati. I said, you'll never throw me out of one of these windows. So that's your friend, your lady friend, and I'm just enjoying the moment. That's it. But we had a great relationship, because one of the things that you know yourself, because you've been in the business, is that we couldn't take money from those guys, because of payola and plugola and things of this nature. So that was a way for them to say thank you to us by just taking us out to dinner, letting us come in the studio and watch them work, and just showing us a pretty good time without spending any money. CBS Records did that in 1977. They flew me to London, England. I asked Joe, I said, I got this opportunity to go to London, England, and he looked up and said, what about payola? Their attorney said, we're not going to see any money. Everything's worked out. And the next week I was on a big old plane flying to London, England, and Heat Wave was there. So it was like going home, and Johnny and Keith showed me the best time. I showed Keith some pictures, as a matter of fact. But we couldn't take money, from that perspective, and just enjoy. So there was the Ohio players. I showed my wife a picture of Satch and Billy D. Williams. I took the picture, horrible picture. You can barely see the picture. I showed her that last night. And we were in Cincinnati. And after we took the picture, the 3 of us went to the Playboy Club in Cincinnati. And I was a nobody, okay? I'm going in. Billy D. Williams had just finished Lady Sings the Blues with Diana Ross. Satch was Satch of the Ohio Players. So you can imagine what it was like with those 2 guys walking into the Playboy Club back in there. And that was some of the things we did. Satch was great. We had a great time. The music was good. So they didn't have to bribe me to play the music, because the music was good. And so Dick Griffey flew in from California and signed Lakeside. He was the president of Solar Records. And, and so we had those kind of relationships with record company executives.
Well, Dayton can claim funk music and should.
Right.
Just as we claim the Wright brothers and the Cash Register.
Right.
It was here, the center of the musical universe from 71 to 75 was here.
Yeah.
Without any doubt.
That's right.
To me, it was so interesting to see the leap. And Sly and the Family Stone was everything.
Right.
That was the crossover. It was the ultimate crossover that was still accepted in the African American community, totally and embraced.
Right.
And Larry Graham would be up there thumping that bass on stage. And what changed that to me as a Caucasian teenager, Sly mutated immediately into something way beyond that, and that was Parliament Funkadelic.
That's right.
It expanded the parameters of what the musical experience could be.
And I tell the story in my autobiography, The Reality of a Fantasy, that I've worked with Sly 4 times and never seen him perform.
I got you. I've seen him twice.
Well, he
was a no-show at one concert. But
Larry Graham was the warmest, nicest guy, big voice. Beside the bass, he had a great big voice. And you could talk to him, he was approachable on stage, and you could talk to him, and he would spend time talking to you. And you're kind of in awe talking to a musician. I'm just a jock at the time. And you develop a relationship with these guys over a period of time. But Sly never had it. I mean, we go in the dressing room and say, well, is he coming out? Well, I don't know if he's coming out or not. And then I just leave it alone, turn around and go on to the next concert. But once we convinced the management at WDAO that funk was okay, and once we convinced them that the music of the local groups was the quality of music that we were playing, like the OJs and Earth, Wind and Fire, they were right up in there with them, then it was okay. And then to add that caveat of the record label spending money, which I'm sure management enjoyed, what you may or may not know is WDAO during that time pulled a 25.7 share of the market. That's the highest ratings ever. And
if I'm not mistaken, our ratings at DAO were higher in the Cincinnati market than they were in the Dayton market.
Oh yeah, and the unique thing is, it's like you said it yourself without actually saying it, because I had to learn the numbers and deal with the numbers and understand the numbers. And I tell people today, I was telling Steve Ross, one of the producers, one of the executive producers, that if every black person in the Miami Valley was listening to WDAO during the ratings, we would never get more than an 8 share of the market.
Right.
But we pulled a 25.7. So where'd the other numbers come from? Mm-hmm. And that was great, because that's the way I planned it, that's the way I programmed it, because I wanted everybody to listen to the station. I didn't want to isolate anybody, any ears, regardless what ages. It was almost like what Keith Wilder said about Heatwave. We play music for everybody, and music transcends time. We're still playing Heatwave's music today.
And that's why it is important to preserve our legacy.
Talk about the Funk Museum.
I just think that as somebody, I was born and raised in Dayton, Ohio. There needs to be civic pride around the things that we have given the world, and one of the most forgotten things is funk music.
Exactly.
Dayton was a hotbed of all types of music. You
Right.
got bluegrass, country, Piney Brown, the blues pianist.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
Oh, yeah.
come on. But funk, we owned it.
We did.
We were the center of the universe for that
Exactly,
time.
exactly.
And it set the tone for so much of the music that branched out in the decades since then.
And it's still being played today.
Most people don't know it. Most people in Dayton have forgotten it, but the people around the world and around the country never knew it then.
Exactly, and the generation is going into to 40 years now.
It's time to preserve that legacy. It can be something that is an educational piece, that if we could get into schools and let schools know local history and teach music at the same time,
Right.
That's critical, because test scores have shown, data shows that students who are receiving some type of musical instruction in
Right.
school do better academically.
Music is
right
therapeutic.
down the line.
Well, I experienced that because I don't talk about it much, but there was a couple things I wanted to do that I did and accomplished at Central State. And one was, I'm leaving a 50,000 watt commercial FM station and going to a 1,000 watt public station.
Right.
It's like, oh God, what am I going to do with it? But because of my love for radio, it didn't make a lot of difference.
And for the students.
And for the students, definitely for the students. But I wanted to test a new format, a format that I designed called urban jazz, okay? So the first thing I did was, it gave me a kind of an out and kind of an excuse. I banned it all rap music because of some of the lyric content. Yeah, I sure did. Now, I caught a lot of flack from the students over the years, but once they graduated and went out into the real world and started having families and listened to the lyric contents of some of the music, they didn't want their kids to listen to it. I said, well, I told you that when you were a freshman. But the urban jazz format with the funk continued that legacy. And we did that successfully for 23 years. And we're very proud of that, along with the students that came through that graduated, got their degrees. Many of them are managers, some of them are owners, some of them are working for BET, TV One, Cleveland, Detroit, are still working in broadcasting, primarily radio, and it just makes me feel so proud to be able to have worked with these young people.
Well, you are responsible for a lot of people, a lot of professionals that are in the radio business now.
Right.
Unfortunately, I got to say, you were also responsible for a lot of people who were in the radio business but aren't still now, because you and I are old.
Yeah, we are. You're right.
We've been blessed by the Lord. We've outlived some of them.
We've outlived a lot of them.
But I got to commend you, David Webb and others, for even making an attempt to try to get the concept of a museum embraced.
Right.
It couldn't be more appropriate. And I hope that we're able to locate those passionate funk fans
Right.
who grew up with it like we did,
Exactly.
who have graduated to the point in their lives they've got the means to help.
Well, and the good news is, it's not a black thing, it's not a white thing, it's our thing.
It's
It's
Dayton.
our thing. It's Dayton's thing.
As I told you, in Washington, D.C. in the 70s, I was proud as heck to tell people I'm from Dayton. Yeah, you know what you're listening to?
Exactly.
That's 4 blocks from my house.
Exactly.
That's where the Zep band was.
We're about ready to close. Give us something to close with, Jim, and it's been just so rewarding for me to see you after all these years, and to talk to you, because we have so many stories to
So
share.
many war memories,
So many
man,
more
oh, man.
memories. Give us something to close with about the Funk Museum and what's going on.
Well, I just think that anybody who has a passion for music, who has a passion for Dayton and its place in history, whether that's Wright Brothers, whether it's music, whether it's manufacturing, we have tried to preserve and celebrate those other accomplishments. I think that we've lost part of that in the funk music world. Mm-hmm. We need to try to preserve it in any way that we can. Exactly. It's a difficult time. It will take passionate fans. It will take resources that have to come from music fans. Right. But they're there.
They're there.
They're there. They just don't know about the cause yet.
Right.
We'll find them.
Jim, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Turk. It's my pleasure.
God
anytime.
bless and
God bless
keep
you
doing
too,
what you're
man.
doing. Ladies and gentlemen, my good friend, Mr. Jim Vangrove. And in closing today, you've been listening to the Funk Chronicles, and I'm your host, Dr. Turk Logan, from Logan Communications and the Funk Music Hall of Fame and Exhibition Center. God bless you. We'll see you the next time.